Daniel's cabin stood alone on the edge of a frozen valley, where the nearest road ended nearly 50 miles away. 4 or 5 winters he had endured the isolation, the kind that gnawed at most men, but for him it was a chosen life. Each morning began the same, splitting firewood, checking supplies, listening to the crackle of the weather radio. But this storm wasn't like the others. The temperature had fallen so low that even the air itself seemed brittle, snapping at his lungs with each breath. Tonight, survival wasn't routine, it was a battle. The cabin groaned under the weight of snow. Gus found every tiny gap between the logs, carrying a whistle that made the silence inside even more unsettling. Daniel moved with deliberate care, filling water jug before the pipes froze, placing extra firewood near the hearth. His father's old advice still haunted him. Nature doesn't forgive carelessness, son. And in conditions like these, even a moment of carelessness could be the last. By midnight, the storm was at full strength. White swirls erased the horizon, pressing against the windows as if the wilderness itself wanted in. Daniel sat by the fire, hands wrapped around a mug, listening to the wood snap and hiss. That was when he heard it again, a sound too sharp to be the wind, too heavy to be the shifting trees. He froze, heart pounding, every instinct telling him to stay put. Yet curiosity pulled him toward the frosted glass. At first, he thought the storm was playing tricks on his eyes. But then the shadows became shapes. Large shapes. One stumbled, then another. He wiped the condensation from the window, squinting into the blizzard. What staggered toward his porch didn't belong in this weather, not at this time of year. 3 figures. A mother wolf, ribs visible beneath her thick coat, and 2 pups pressed weakly against her sides. Their fur was stiff with ice, movement sluggish. Wolves should have been deep in their den, hidden from the biting cold. If they were out here, exposed to the storm, something had gone terribly wrong. Daniel's breath fogged against the glass as he watched them. The pups could barely keep pace, collapsing into the snow, struggling to rise again. The mother nosed them forward with desperate nudges, but her own legs shook beneath her. The sight twisted something inside him. He had lived years in the wild, witnessed predators hunt and prey fall, but never had he seen such raw desperation. They weren't hunting. They were simply fighting to stay alive. And now, with the storm closing in, they had chosen his cabin. Daniel's fingers lingered on the edge of the curtain, torn between pulling it shut or pressing his face closer to the glass. The wolves were nearly at his porch now, their outlines blurred by the blizzard, their strength visibly ebbing with each step. The mother staggered, catching herself with a paw before collapsing completely, her sides heaving as if every breath was a battle. The pups huddled tighter, shivering uncontrollably. Their legs folded beneath them again and again, only to rise weakly at their mother's insistence. Every instinct Daniel had sharpened over years of wilderness living screamed at him. Don't open the door. Don't interfere. Wolves were predators, dangerous even in the best of circumstances. A mother protecting her pups could be lethal if she felt threatened. Yet, as he watched the storm pile snow against their freezing bodies, another thought forced itself into his mind. If he did nothing, they wouldn't last the night. The thermometer on his wall read -42. Wind chill drove it closer to 50 below. He knew the signs of hypothermia, violent shivering at first, then stillness as the body surrendered. And that stillness was creeping into the pups. Their movements were jerky, uncoordinated, their eyes heavy with exhaustion. The mother's fur was glazed with frost, her muscles quivering under the weight of exhaustion. It was only a matter of time. Daniel stepped back from the window, running his hands through his hair, pacing across the creaking wooden floor. His rules had always been clear. Observe nature, respect its boundaries, never intervene. He had repeated those words like scripture since the day he moved here. But those rules had never prepared him for this. Life and death crouching at his doorstep. The wind slammed against the cabin again, rattling the shutters and making the lanterns flicker. He glanced at the heavy oak door, its iron handle cold to the touch. Opening it would be reckless. A single misstep and the mother could turn on him. She had the power to tear through him before he reached for his rifle. But if he stayed locked inside, he'd be forced to listen as they froze, helpless, just inches away. His eyes landed on the storage shed attached to the cabin. It wasn't much, just a small, insulated room where he kept tools and spare equipment. But it was separate from his living space, with its own door. If he could lure them there, it might be enough to keep them alive until the storm broke. The question was, how? Through the glass, he saw the mother wolf slump onto her side. Snow clung thick to her fur, her chest rising and falling shallowly. One pup toppled forward into the drift and didn't rise right away. The mother nudged it with her muzzle, but her movements were slow, sluggish. Daniel's pulse spiked. Time was running out. He grabbed 2 thick blankets from his emergency kit and draped them over his arm. His heart pounded against his ribs like a drum as he pulled on his heaviest gloves. Every survival manual warned against this. But survival manuals didn't account for what it felt like to watch life drain from living creatures only feet away. He stood at the door, hand on the iron handle, frozen in the moment between instinct and compassion. Outside, the wolves huddled tighter, the storm burying them deeper in snow. If he opened the door, everything could end in blood. If he didn't, they would die. Daniel's cabin stood like a lone sentinel on the edge of a frozen valley, a dot of warmth and light swallowed by the endless Alaskan wilderness. For most people, living this far from civilization was unthinkable. No neighbors, no stores, no roads cleared after a storm. Just miles upon miles of snow, forest, and silence. But for Daniel, solitude wasn't a punishment, it was a choice. He had come here 5 winters ago, trading city noise for the quiet breath of pines and the raw honesty of nature. Routine was what kept him alive. Each morning, he followed the same ritual. Split wood, check supplies, tune into the low crackle of the weather radio. Tonight, however, his ritual felt fragile, like a thin thread stretched against something far greater. The storm pressing against his cabin wasn't like the others. The temperature had plummeted faster than he'd ever seen, the kind of cold that gnawed at bones, the kind that could strip life away in minutes if you made even the smallest mistake. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and melting snow. Daniel moved carefully through the one-room cabin, filling water jugs before the pipes froze solid, stacking extra firewood near the hearth where the flames snapped and hissed. His father's voice still haunted him. Nature doesn't forgive carelessness, son. And Daniel had learned the truth of that. Out here, a broken lantern or a misstep on the ice could mean the end. By midnight, the storm was a living thing. Winds roared like a freight train, rattling the shutters until they clattered against the log walls. Snow slammed against the glass, blotting out the horizon, turning the world into a white void. Daniel sat by the fire, a wool blanket over his shoulders, listening to the storm test every seam of his cabin. He had survived blizzards before, but something about this one, the sheer weight of it, the way the wind howled like voices in the dark, unsettled him. Then he heard it. At first, he thought it was just the storm playing tricks, a branch snapping, or ice shifting in the trees. But the sound came again, low, strained, carried faintly on the wind. A cry, not human, but desperate. His heartbeat spiked. He stood, set his mug aside, and moved toward the frost-clouded window. He wiped the condensation with the back of his hand, squinting into the storm. At first, he saw nothing but the blur of snow swirling like smoke. Then the shadows came. Large, moving shadows. His breath caught in his throat as he realized they weren't trees swaying or tricks of a night. They were alive. 3 shapes staggered against the wind, barely holding themselves upright. As they drew closer, details emerged. The gaunt form of a mother wolf, ribs visible beneath her ice-crusted fur, and pressed tight against her, 2 pups stumbling through the drifts. Daniel's chest tightened. Wolves shouldn't have been here, not now. By this point in winter, they should have been secure in their den, hidden from the cold, waiting for spring. If they were out here, exposed, fighting a storm like this, something had gone terribly wrong. The pups faltered, legs folding as the snow swallowed them. Again and again, they tried to rise, only to collapse, their bodies quivering with exhaustion. The mother nosed them forward, her own strength failing, her paws dragging through the drifts instead of cutting across them. She was running on instinct alone, an instinct to keep her young alive, no matter the cost. Daniel pressed his forehead against the glass, fogging the window with his breath. He had seen wolves before, always from a distance, always with respect for the boundaries that separated human and wild. But he had never seen them like this, not as hunters, not as shadows to be feared, but as creatures fighting desperately against nature itself. And now, in the heart of the storm, they had stumbled toward the only shelter for miles. His cabin. The storm raged on through the night, rattling Daniel's cabin with a force that felt almost personal, as though the wilderness itself were testing his resolve. Yet within the storage room, just a thin wall away from where he sat, a miracle was unfolding. He had watched the wolf family collapse inside, exhausted and half-frozen. At first, their breathing was shallow, their bodies limp beneath the blankets. For a terrifying hour, Daniel wondered if he had only delayed the inevitable. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, life began to stir. The pups were the first. Their small chests rose with deeper breaths, their twitching limbs gaining strength. A faint whine cut through the muffled roar of the blizzard, weak but undeniable. The mother, her body curled protectively around them, lifted her head. Steam rose from her fur as the heat seeped into her muscles, thawing the frost that had encased her like armor. She nosed one pup, then the other, and when their tails gave the faintest wag, Daniel's throat tightened. He remained in his cabin, watching through the connecting window that overlooked the shed. He didn't dare enter. This was their space now, a fragile sanctuary he had intruded upon only enough to open the door. Instead, he became their quiet sentinel, adding wood to the fire, checking on them each hour, whispering reassurances to himself as much as to them. Outside, the storm clawed at the valley for another day and a half. Snow buried the porch nearly to the windows. Ice crusted the cabin walls, and the thermometer dipped lower than he'd ever seen. But in the storage room, warmth held. Life held. By the second night, the pups were stronger. Daniel saw them stirring, pushing their small muzzles against the blankets as if testing the world again. One even stood, wobbly on thin legs, before collapsing back into the warmth of its mother's side. The mother wolf, though still gaunt and weary, kept her eyes open. She did not growl, did not bare her teeth. Instead, she watched him with an intensity that unsettled him. Not a predator's glare, but something harder to define. Awareness, caution, perhaps even trust. Daniel left small offerings just inside the shed door. A metal bowl of water, a few strips of dried meat. He never lingered. He would place them quickly and retreat, waiting until the wolves were sure he was gone. The mother always approached first, sniffing, testing. Only when she was satisfied would she allow the pups near. Watching them eat, seeing the spark return to their eyes, Daniel felt a warmth that went beyond the fire. When dawn finally broke on the third day, it revealed a world transformed. The storm had spent itself, leaving the valley buried under glittering drifts of snow. Sunlight spilled across the frozen landscape, a sharp contrast to the darkness of nights before. Inside the shed, the wolves stirred with new energy. The pups, once limp with cold, now tumbled weakly over each other in clumsy play. Their tiny yips carried faintly through the walls, a sound that made Daniel smile despite the exhaustion etched into his face. The mother wolf rose to her feet, shaking out her fur, stronger now, though still lean. She paced the length of the storage room, restless, pausing often at the door where sunlight streamed through the cracks. Nature was calling her back. Daniel knew this moment would come. He had given them shelter, but they could not stay. Wolves were not meant to live within walls, no matter how kind. To keep them longer would be selfish, dangerous even. They belonged to the wild, to the forests and valleys beyond his porch. That morning, he opened the outer door to the shed. Fresh air rushed in, crisp and sharp, carrying with it the scents of pine and snow. The wolves froze, their eyes fixed on the sudden burst of light. The pups whined, uncertain, but the mother stepped forward, nostrils flaring. For a long moment she stood there, framed in the doorway, torn between the safety of warmth and the instinct of freedom. Daniel stayed back, giving her space. His hands itched to reach for his camera, to capture the scene unfolding like something from a dream. But he didn't move. He didn't even breathe too loudly. Some memories, he realized, were meant to live only in the heart. With deliberate grace, the mother wolf turned. She nudged her pups gently, guiding them toward the open world. They hesitated, paused clumsy on the wooden floor, but followed. Together, they stepped into the snow, their forms stark against the white blaze of morning. Daniel watched from the threshold. The pups bounded awkwardly, testing their newfound strength while the mother lingered. She looked back once, her golden eyes locking with his. Not with fear, not with aggression, but with something deeper, something that made his chest ache. A silent acknowledgement. Then she turned, leading her young into the wilderness. Their tracks stitched across the fresh snow until distance swallowed them whole, leaving only silence in their wake. Daniel stood in the doorway long after they were gone, the cold biting his skin, the sun glinting off the valley. He had broken every rule he lived by. He had risked his life on a choice no manual would ever recommend. Yet, as he breathed in the still air of a world remade by storm and survival, he knew he would make the same choice again. That evening, Daniel sat by his fire, staring into the flames while the memory replayed again and again. The storm, the cries in the night, the moment his hand touched the door handle. Those images would stay with him for the rest of his life. He had lived by rules carved out of necessity. Observe nature, never interfere, respect its laws. But sometimes, he realized, rules weren't enough. Sometimes survival meant seeing beyond instinct and boundaries, choosing compassion, even when it came with risk. Through his window, the valley lay quiet, washed in silver moonlight. The wolf family was gone, their paw prints already softening under drifting snow. Yet Daniel didn't feel alone. The silence felt different now. Less like isolation, more like connection. Somewhere in the endless forest, a mother wolf was guiding her pups, alive because he had opened his door. That thought warmed him more than the fire ever could. In the days that followed, Daniel returned to his routines, but the experience changed him. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind carried a new weight. He had seen nature at its harshest and its most fragile, and he had been part of both. Looking back, he didn't regret breaking the rules. If anything, the moment reminded him of something greater. The humans aren't separate from the wild, but part of it. And in rare, fleeting moments, we're given a choice to honor that bond. If this story touched you the way it touched Daniel, take a second to imagine what you would have done that night. Would you have opened the door? Would you have risked everything to give life a chance? These questions remind us of how powerful compassion can be, even in the most unforgiving places. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't let this be the end. Subscribe to our channel and join a growing community of people who value the extraordinary connections between humans and the natural world. Every week, we bring you new stories, real, raw, and unforgettable, that prove kindness can exist even in the wildest places. So, hit the subscribe button, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and keep exploring with us. Because sometimes, the most remarkable adventures aren't just about survival. They're about the choices that define who we are.